Suzanne takes you down to her place near the river.
The consequences of not fixing things are real. I think until the consequences manifest, people will not change. But I do think that even though it's not visible, that there is a deepening, and that from that deepening will come an understanding by which these issues will be addressed from a much more profound place.
That was Richard Grossinger, our guest for today's podcast.
And you want to travel with her, and you want to travel blind, and you know that she will trust you.
Welcome to the Sue Speaks podcast, searching for unity in everything. I'm your host, Suzanne Taylor. How can we turn the world around? Can we turn this world around? That's what I talk to my guests about. In fact, everything I've done has been in that pursuit, buoyed up by that famous quote by Margaret Mead, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I first met Richard Grossinger when he was 8 years old, and I married into his family. Well, sort of his family. At the time, he was on the second person who he had identified as his father, who was my brother-in-law, with one more father, his actual biological one, to go. Compound that aberration with his mother and two half-siblings later committing suicide, and you'll see what background gave Richard so much material for writing some 40 books, and with his wife, Lindy Huff, founding North Atlantic Books, a publishing company specializing in books related to transformation and enlightenment that are outside the box of material science, that's still going strong in this era when many other book publishers have folded. Having been steeped in so many of the modalities North Atlantic publishes books about, from Tai Chi to Tarot to craniosacral therapy to dream work to bioenergetic therapy to Gestalt and movement work to yoga to psychic studies, now that Richard has gotten to be an elder, he's a good person to talk to about how to navigate the challenge that is human life. With me always looking for a game changer to shift humanity from being greedy to being compassionate, and doing that even more intensely now that I have gotten older and don't have forever to make my contribution, let's see if the treasure trove that is Richard has any bright ideas about who we are and what we are doing here, and especially for getting people out of an implosion in self-interest that could destroy humanity. Richard, so people can get a flavor of you before we dive into your opinions, can we take a little time for you to speak about how you came to be who you are?
These days, I tend to think how we became who we are is a mystery, and that the events that shape us, although they clearly have impact, maybe other events would have shaped us if those hadn't, and we would end up on the path somehow we were intended to be on. At the moment, I would say, certainly as you indicated, coming from a family that was so deeply involved in the shadow makes it essential that you work with shadow energies yourself, or you get inundated and overwhelmed by them. And long before I understood what what was the nature of shadow energies, I implicitly worked with them. Because of my odd combination of families, I ended up getting put in psychoanalysis as a child, which had a big influence, not so much psychoanalytically, but in making me think about the world symbolically, as opposed to literally. I often feel that the original analyst I had, starting when I was 8, that he was initiating me into an occult system that he was not aware of, and certainly I was not aware of, and he had to set my initiation at a deep enough level so that when I was ready for it, I would wake up and follow. That's my kind of parable for what happened. I also think growing up in New York City in the 50s and 60s, and at a time when people in high school were really first getting involved in tarot and mysticism of all sorts and also avant-garde literature had a big influence because the people I knew in high school, particularly my friend Chuck Stein, then linked me up to people outside my college landscape. So that after I met Lindy during college, we began going to the salon of the poet Robert Kelly, who taught at Bard. So we were going down by the Hudson. And in that experience, we got directly initiated into the occult. We got reading lists and lectures, personal lectures, and got given a sense of the significance of serious commitment and practice, as opposed to the colleges we were going to, which were very Ivy League, Amherst and Smith, which were much more kind of achievement and career oriented and more social. And then doing a PhD in anthropology had some influence. I never did what I wanted to do, which was study shamanism, but just doing anthropology made a difference. And teaching at Goddard in the early 70s made a difference because the students were, at that time in the counterculture, much more radical and experiential than I was. I was at that point mainly an intellectual seeker. They helped make a priority out of really seeking for real. And then discovering California in the mid-70s, and I began doing not only Tai Chi, but Tai Chi related things, and studied cranial sacral therapy and other bodywork systems. And because we were raising kids, I would dip in and out. So there were years when I studied intensely, but many, many years when I just did the press to earn a living or wrote books. And more recently, starting in 2008, I undertook studying psychic practice and psychic energies, first at the Berkeley Psychic Institute very briefly, before deciding it just wasn't the right kind of place. And then for the last 10 plus years with John Friedlander, who was a graduate of the Berkeley Psychic Institute, but also was with Jane Roberts when she channeled Seth. So he has a very broad perspective, a Buddhist perspective also. So those are the things I would throw out at the moment. They're very explicit though, and I could probably tell an entirely different story, which would be just as credible as to how I got to where I was. Probably more than one such story. So
no, I have a better understanding now of where this all came from. I mean, I know what you do and whatever, but I didn't really know what all those roots were. And isn't that interesting that you're so academic, you know, your PhD and what have you, and then you've sprung off into this dimension that is so much, could we say the opposite of that, or, you know, not...
I always felt the academic stuff was just because in our generation we weren't guided to do other things. So you actually had to find the other things on your own, and the academic stuff was just like the cover story. But there certainly were far more daring contemporaries of mine, as you know, who just went right into practice and had all different types of experiences, some of them very creative and positive, some of them dark. And
like whom? William Irwin Thompson, I think you...
Well, I'm just thinking of people I knew, people who were friends, who may have started off in academic stuff, but then dropped out pretty quickly and studied Buddhism. That's the most common thing that people did. But I know other people who went to India and didn't so much study Buddhism as look for general spiritual traditions, or became an initiate, like Michael Harner dropped out of, he's of an older, somewhat older generation than me, but he dropped out of academia to actually study the practice of shamanism and set up a whole center for that.
Well, you've gone on now, you know, just to give you a little bit more of a platform of applause here from me. I was so impressed by what Brian Swim had to say about The Night Sky, which you rewrote of your 40 books in 2014. This is what Brian Swim had to say. Richard Grossinger's new book, speaking of the new edition of The Night Sky, should be heralded as the publishing event of the decade. This is a book that has the power to change your relationship to the universe. I would even say it has the potentiality to participate in the evocation of a new civilization. Well, coming from my love of my life, so to speak, my academic life or my esoteric life or whatever, Brian Swim. Wow.
I mean, given that it's hyperbole, right? It's wonderful that he said it. And there's also the painful reality that the first time The Night Sky was published, I think it sold like 15,000 copies or something. And then it was republished. It was published first by Sierra Club in the early 80s, and then in the later 80s, republished by Tarcher, and I think sold 5,000 copies. But those were very much rough drafts of what I eventually did and that Brian felt so good about. And it sold, I think, 500 or 600 copies and has not reached many readers, let alone evoked civilizations. But that's also a function of the times and the fragmentation and the difficulty of reaching people. It's sort of live into the end of the milieu that you were working in. And although I take it with a grain of salt, I did get some, whether it was amusement or solace, from a channeler in New Zealand who wrote me that, a man named Keith Hill, who wrote that disembodied beings that he was channeling were reading my works and promised me that there was a readership in the future, long past my lifetime, that I shouldn't feel disappointed or whatever.
Well, isn't that interesting? A function of the times. I think people aren't reading books
Right.
anymore. We're so busy reading online that everybody's exhausted from
I
daily
ran
reading.
into a month or so ago. I ran into an old poet friend, Cecil Brown, who it was at a kind of jazz festival in Oakland, and he came up and he whispered in my ear, "Did we ever think things would get so bad? There are no readers anymore."
Yeah.
"How can I write?" he said. "There are no readers anymore."
Where do we go with that? What is there to say about that? Have we gotten smarter so we don't need to read the most impressive book that would change your relationship to the universe? Is everybody enlightened now? I mean, whoa, I didn't realize, the sales situation had changed so much.
Well, people are reading. I think the kinds of books I read it's not the right time for those sorts of books. They're big and complicated and stuff.
I should give a little more background here. I want to read a little bit about the whole body of your work related to The Night Sky. The 2014 revised edition of The Night Sky completes a 9-book project, I guess you've written this, that began without a blueprint and ran for about 36 years while I investigated 4 main topics: medicine, cosmology, embryology, and consciousness, each from a combination of scientific, anthropological, historical, and esoteric viewpoints. Wow. I mean, how impressive is that, really? And then the next sentence, this obviously, of course, is what you wrote. The next sentence is, "My premise is that science is telling us half or less of what it is doing." And maybe that's what we could talk about a little bit. That what's going on where the God of science doesn't belong on the throne, such as it is.
I'm going to take a step back, Suzanne. When you said you were going to do this podcast with me, we've already had 2 fairly long discussions offline, so to speak, and have explored, kind of poked around various issues. And I'd like to come to that issue, but I'm also thinking about something that you've raised not just this time, but often with me.
In many of our long conversations.
Yeah. Why don't people, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but why don't people do the right thing? Why don't they deal with the problems that exist and not be so greedy and not be so violent
Yeah, really. I mean, if the whole world falls apart, it falls apart on all those people who are being greedy and violent.
Yeah. And I know this sounds simplistic and cliched, but since I've re-met Suzanne as an adult, maybe about 30 years ago or so.
Me, Suzanne.
Yes, it's meeting.
Meaning me.
Yeah, meaning you.
Yes, we
I've
did take a
realized that
gap. How
this
many
is,
years? A couple of decades, yeah.
Yeah. I realized that this isn't a trivial pursuit of hers. This is a committed undertaking that goes really deep. She feels the wrongness of things and has this impassioned desire to make them better. And I don't know how many times I've had the discussion with her in which she has said, why? Or I don't understand. And that's the thing that I think is most interesting.
Who is this she? This is me.
I know.
She is me.
Yes, well.
Right. So, this is our, constant query, constant query. What's going on, Richard?
What I think is that what you see is reality. And by reality, I don't mean this reality. I mean some sort of fundamental core reality that's driving this manifestation that we're in. And that core reality has contradictions and unanswered questions and fundamental dilemmas that precede this world in some sense, that precede this universe. And that because those things exist, there's no way for our world to exist any differently. The things that this world needs to repair and redeem are at a really deep level. And the degree of suffering and conflict and kind of misuse of energy that is at the core of all the dysfunction, that is only that at this level of manifestation. Because as it enters our sphere, it becomes polarized into conflict and into selfishness and into fear, all the emotions that drive the world to be as it is. And if things were fixable at the level that you want to fix them, the whole universe would thin out and evaporate. The depth of the universe is the depth of the problem that this creation is trying to fix, or has come about because these things need fixing. Sure, it would be nice if things worked better, and it would be more than nice, because the prognosis for things continuing to work this badly is pretty disruptive and dystopian. And I think that the way to get things to work better is to redeem them at the level at which they're happening. That's not going to be accomplished by telling people what the right behavior is, because they're not going to do it. And you can just see that in the electorate in the various countries that have, now that have these authoritarian dictatorships that are materialist authoritarian, including the United States. There's no incentive for people to want to fix things. And the consequences of not fixing things are real. And I suppose if you could imagine people being thrust into the mess that will result and then being able to go backwards in time and fix things, maybe they would. But I think until the consequences manifest, the full consequences, people will not change. But I do think that even though it's not visible, that there is a deepening, and that from that deepening will come an understanding by which these issues will be addressed from a much more profound place. I was thinking on the way here, we were listening in the car to the audio memoir of Nadia Murad, who was a teenage Yazidi girl kidnapped by ISIS and sold as a slave, and in a period of 3 months of captivity passed through numerous owners and was repeatedly beaten and raped and taunted. And she survived to bear witness before the UN and get the Nobel Peace Prize. And her journey, which is something not only didn't she wish for, but as she was being carted off to Mosul in the bus, she wanted to go up in the sky and become one of the stars, as in a Yazidi myth. So because she so dreaded what she was headed towards, and who wouldn't dread it, and in no way was it anything she sought, but because of it, she was transformed at a kind of level of her soul that, I mean, however you believe these things, maybe she'll get to skip 3 or 4 incarnations in terms of her personal development because she went through such pain and survived it and came out of it with a message and a way to speak to the world. And she had never even been as far as Mosul when she was kidnapped.
So you're speaking about how profound the dysfunction is and how stupid the world is, that she would have to undergo such
Well, I'm just saying
experiences.
it's not stupid, because I don't think the world is stupid.
Well, it's a
and
simplistic label.
And I don't think that the people who committed those atrocities were in simple states. And as long as one thinks, oh, they were simply venal and kind of horrible people who committed acts from pure indulgence and appetite or whatever, that doesn't really, it doesn't get you anywhere. It's true on one level. I mean, it's true of Trump at a certain level, but it doesn't get you to the root of the situation, and it doesn't get you anywhere where you can change it. The only possible viable place has to assume that all those people and Donald Trump and everyone else are going to get redeemed and are going to see the light at some point. Because if, as in the Buddhist sense, this is an interdependent creation and there's a unity consciousness underlying it, everything will be drawn to that. And everything is a reflection of that. So we're clearly, I mean, what it means to me is we're not very far down the line.
Yeah.
It's a long way to go. So to get back to your other question about science, I mean, I've written about this extensively, and I might as well say that I have this book coming out in March or April of 2020. It's the first time in about 30 years that I've published with another publisher. And I'm really grateful to Inner Traditions, not only for publishing this book, which is called Bottoming Out the Universe, Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing, but I'm really grateful to them for an extremely thoughtful and provocative editing job that pushed me to change the book a great deal from the book I handed into them. And in that book, I deal primarily with science because the question is, how do you bottom out the universe? Science's view was that you bottom it out by going inside atoms and going inside quarks and through string theory and through understanding gravity and maybe ultimately dark matter and dark energy and all sorts of ways like that, or you bottom it out by understanding the laws of physics, relativity, the space-time continuum, the Big Bang, the ostensible origin of the universe, which your friend Brian Swim calls the primal flaring forth, in order to rebrand it. What I think is that clearly science works, because look at the difference between the planet now and the planet that the hominids were handed in the Ice Age. Using science, the planet has been changed. How that's happened is a kind of interesting ontological and even epistemological question. Whether, in fact, over long periods of time, millions of years, you inevitably transform things by magic, by thought forms, by projections, or whether you need empirical science to do it. But at that scale, at millions of years, empirical science and magic are the same thing, because empirical science is simply a form of magic carried out directly on objects. And magic takes a much longer time, but the two converge. I think that science is limited on two ways. It's limited to the material manifestation. And if you think that the material manifestation is all there is, then science, it's home free. It gets the check mark, and there needn't be anything else. One reason I subtitled the book, I subtitled it originally, I think, Karma, Reincarnation, and Personal Identity. But working with inner traditions, I ultimately re-subtitled it, Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing. Why is there something rather than nothing? There could be just nothing anywhere forever. And somewhere in this issue of how something arose and emanated into this is a deeper reality than the reality of science, which merely addresses how that something operates. It has to operate some way, so it operates this way for probably reasons that are intrinsic not only to physics, but to the Kabbalah or all sorts of others, or to Dzogchen Buddhist texts that analyze how karma, or the force of the divine force, passes through, creates nature and manifests and stuff. So I don't remember exactly the terms in which you put the question, but in the book, I often find that when you write, one of the outcomes of writing is that you hit upon language that you wouldn't have thought of. Like in the introduction to the book, I was writing about how when science looks at what things are, like turns the microscope or the collider at Geneva and crashes particles into one another, the universe doesn't bottom out as anything. It just changes its nature. And I said, it's really, ultimately, it's not the physics, it's the physics of a mirage. It's not the physics of an enduring reality. It's like a mirage. It's a dream physics. And I think what I said was something like, scientists know this, but they don't admit it. And then the second point was, that I made in the introduction, was that consciousness doesn't fit. There's no way to explain consciousness in scientific terms. And then I said, but it's not as though scientists don't get out the shoehorn and make it fit. They do. And that's the point. They fit consciousness in by sort of rigging the system to make it work so that consciousness is created and generated. And then later in the 5th chapter, I was dealing with this, what I always think is a thorny issue. Is this real? John Friedlander says it's not real, but it's meaningful, and that's more important than being real. Science says the opposite. Science says it has no meaning. It just is. Whereas, John says, well, no, it's not real. It's a thought form. It's a thought form we've generated, but it's a deeply meaningful thought form. It's an exquisitely created reality designed by a higher form of our own intelligence to allow us to explore certain kinds of experiences and to tell certain kinds of stories. And in playing around with that, one phrase I came up with relatively recently was, this is not real, but reality is real. That is, something is real, and that something is where we come from and what we're engaged with. So the ultimate outcome of this civilization and this species and this mode of consciousness sort of rests with us over the long haul. But what I wanted to say earlier was what you've done for the last 50 or 60 years is wonderful, not only because you pursued these questions with such sincerity and goodwill, but you've supported seekers and writers, and you've been taken advantage of by people who have used your generosity, but it never stopped you from continuing to support people who were seeking. And that kind of open-heartedness and generosity is really your contribution. And you can't solve the problems. The crop circles ultimately don't make, it's interesting, it doesn't make one bit of difference or the other in the bigger picture. But you have contributed just by your uniqueness as a person. And you've had to take a really long journey to do that. of which I've maybe seen more parts than most people, because I've seen you go from lively intellectual Syracuse University student to kind of Hollywood housewife and cookbook author to kind of hippie, reborn person seeking in LA, to kind of deepening and aging your own wisdom. And it's a journey. And if we believe in the soul and the journey of the soul, you've covered a lot of ground. And that will be built into the word karma is so cliche, but it's built into the karma, to the energy, to the forms that you'll take in the future.
That actually makes me feel really good.
Okay.
You wonder about your life. Oh my God, what have I been doing? And all the things that are the disasters of your life and the frustrations and the world, such as it is, being interested in it being different. And so all those things.
Yeah, John says mistakes aren't optional; they're required.
Well,
that's how you learn.
Right, I do understand that. But all those things you said really are valuable for me to hear. It's like, oh, I have to rethink my own self, which is okay, because it's very challenging to be human, as far as I can tell.
It is very challenging. John says that even though it's challenging, other life forms that occupy this space, but we don't see them because they're in other planes, like the angels, they much more often choose to be human than humans choose to be angels, even though they see how painful it is, because it's the only way to get such an experience.
Oh, no, I love that. That's a good story. I like that a lot. One of my future podcasts is going to be with Larry Dossey.
Yeah.
And he did one of Oprah's Super Sunday programs talking about prayer. And I really learned a lot listening to that. I know Larry, and I love Larry. He's another one of those really magic beings, wonderful human being. But I didn't know all of the prayer work that he'd been doing, and that he's really quite responsible for teaching the world and the medical community that prayer actually scientifically, but that's the one that gives us our authority now, has many, many studies that show that prayer actually makes a difference. This is really quite wonderful in the advancement of our situation.
Yeah, and your Nisa, who's living in your house, Nisa Money, was a dom in her and discovered that using their essentially etheric energy machines are able, she says, they were curing stage 4 cancer and things, using this kind of, essentially you could call it a technology, but it's a blend between magic and technology.
These are the things that you referred to. I can't remember exactly how you described it as, the promising things that we really are advancing at the same time as we're so stuck. I want to sort of take issue, because I think this is maybe what we do in all our conversations. Yes, the world is what it is because it's inevitable. It had to become what it is now. So what is it now? Well, what is it now is a world challenged as never before with the possible, well, I shouldn't say that. During the Kennedy time, we thought maybe the nuclear situation was going to destroy us. But now, that was a threat for something that could happen. But now we deal with things like global warming, which isn't about to, in one moment, destroy the world, but something that we get to grapple with. And these things are tremendously serious as never before, as things we can grapple with. So that why wouldn't this be a time, given that everything is the way it worked out and no surprises, yes, we have to be in the spot we're in, but why isn't this a spot where the challenges are so unique and we've hit a wall, and when you've hit the wall, you look for what to do to deal with that so that you don't destroy humanity. Now, isn't that a natural pursuit? And why wouldn't there possibly be something like, for instance, the reason I got so involved with the crop circles, not that I ever knew anything about UFOs or anything like that. I was not, an aficionado of that world. But when I stumbled across the crop circles, I saw there was scientific evidence that we couldn't be making them, at least many of them. And all that has to happen is that we have definitive proof that the world, it gets delivered to the world, you can't argue with it anymore, that there is another intelligence engaging with us. And immediately The world is in a conversation that won't go away. We've got a new reality that we are chewing on. Now, turns out that crop circles are not going to be that, but could have been. And what about could there be something else? Now, why can't there be something? I even think, Richard, that if you got somebody and incredibly charismatic and very authentic and very powerful on television where everybody in the world can watch, everybody, so to speak, and they laid out the danger we're in, the need that we have for all the billionaires to throw in their money, for everyone to hop to. It's time to make that change. Materialism and capitalism has run its course. Endless growth is not possible. We've got to do something else for the survival of humanity. Now, why isn't that a cogent argument whereby we really could come up with things?
Yeah, that's your argument as opposed to
Yeah.
your life. I mean, you're in the same position that Nadia Murad was saying to her captors at ISIS, how can you treat another human being like this? How can you do this to me? You have sisters and mothers and daughters. I'm a person. Its impact on them was to make them laugh.
But the logic of that isn't the same.
It is the same logic.
No, not the same as we could destroy the earth. And like if you...
It is, because it's operating through the same mechanism in the brain. It doesn't matter what the words are. It matters what power the person speaking holds in relation to you and whether you will accept being spoken to by them. I mean, can you imagine going into the ghetto of LA and making an impassioned argument? They're not interested. They're not going to listen. And now that you have the whole internet with its fake realities and stuff, you're never going to convince people that anything you say, you could have an asteroid barreling towards the Earth and people would say, no, it's a conspiracy. Or is that real or is that a story?
I don't know about that.
We've lost that moment. And I realized that a thread I didn't finish earlier was when I was talking about science. The other problem with it is that it's value neutral, which means it has no value. And everything it creates can be used destructively, as well as, I suppose you could say, productively. So you have a philosophy and a mathematics creating objects without any value. And that's without any real moral value. They're just created for economic and military and other purposes. And thus the problems that you're talking about, I mean, that's almost like the karmic outcome of using nature in that way. Using nature without any basis of value, you're going to come to the dead end at some point. You're going to hit the wall. And the wall is, again, I'll quote John, he says, the universe doesn't punish you. It simply says, try something else. And the universe is basically saying to us, try something else. And I think something intrinsic in us, not extrinsic, but intrinsic, has to change for that to happen. And that hasn't changed yet, although the fact that things are getting worse rather than better in many ways would perhaps be a good indication that they're getting close to changing. Like Elias Lonsdale, a psychic that we both know, said to me recently, everything is so impossible now, which is exactly the reason I think that it's possible.
Exactly. That's just what I'm talking about. Exactly. So let me ask you a serious question. What if, to make a dramatic example, what if an asteroid were headed here and you could show it and it wasn't something, fake news. They wouldn't be able to dismiss it as fake news. And a time frame, let's say it's headed here and it's going to land in 6 months. And it's going to be like the dinosaurs got wiped out. That's what it figures to be. It figures to wipe out intelligent life. What if there were that? Don't you think that humanity would mobilize of how to dissolve it?
Some people would, but I think that the truth is, and actually you could bring this up with Larry Dossey because he talks about this, that people how I would phrase it, and I'm borrowing from a friend really here, is that it's easier for humanity to imagine the extinction of existence than it is for them to imagine fixing it. And the way Larry puts it is, he says, people would rather just march off into the darkness and just give up than they would addressing the real difficulty of existence. That's the heart of skepticism. The heart of skepticism is to not want to believe in anything because it's, I think he uses the term, if you man up, is what he said. You man up to the fact that there's nothing here. I quote from what's his name, Justin Torres's novel about the kid growing up with a macho father who says, "What happens after you die?" And the father says angrily back, "Nothing happens. Nothing happens forever." And that's the preference. Larry is saying that's what people actually want. So you have that asteroid headed here, and people say, "I don't care," So
I don't think you're buying my premise.
Not everybody, but most people. My own belief is that Donald Trump is not a climate change denier. He's more a climate change prevaricator. That as long as the masses are kept believing that there's no climate change, he can try and build his protective citadels and get as much revenue resources as he can. He and the other people will build underground cities, and that it's really, the terror runs deep. And people now are, whether it's Putin or that prince in Saudi Arabia or whatever, build up, there's no nest egg big enough. I think that is driving things. Unfortunately, I think that the billionaires, rather than putting their money into dissolving the asteroid, would put their money into how deep do they have to dig to protect themselves. So I don't think that's the way it's going to get solved.
Oh, Richard, I really want to argue with you that the denial runs deep, for sure. I'm thinking back to Est, which I did in 1972, where he talked about people being dead right. They'd rather stick on some course of whatever their disease is, it's going to kill them, rather than or acknowledge that they had to change some.
Yeah, they have an exit strategy.
Well, what, being dead?
Yeah.
But I thought that was a felicitous kind of phrase, being people would rather be dead right than do anything about it. However, if you really take my example seriously, it's a different example from the way the situation is and as it moves along.
Well, that's the problem, that it depends completely on the science, which didn't create the asteroid, but which created so many of the other problems. It puts all the reliance on a scientific feat, which I don't think is what's going to bring humanity together.
Well, I'm just mentioning asteroid as just a really dramatic, graphic kind of thing that, we all can relate to, so to speak. Given how dire things are, and global warming, of course, being the leading direness that's going on now.
Even with that, we don't know exactly how it'll play out.
That's true too.
Climate is a chaos system, and
we may not be able to do anything about it.
We may not be able to do anything. It may turn out to be so severe that it'll force earlier changes, or it may have unforeseen consequences which will change civilization in some way.
But what you're talking about is it will play out, and it will do its terrible thing, whatever it may be. And I'm just saying, wait a minute. We are in a situation. First of all, we have global communication. We can all pay attention to something. And if
but it's contaminated.
What is contaminated?
The global communication. It's completely contaminated.
Given even that, take all of the arguments and open the possibility that we are in a kind of a situation which even gives rise to a me who is talking like this, It gives rise to people who are standing on, their own soapboxes to try to really do something that in years past didn't stand a chance. But
Well, you are doing something. You just don't know what it is you're doing.
Looking for, a way out, looking for...
You're not going to solve this problem, and you're not even going to think of the way somebody else could solve this problem.
Well, that's
So
what you say.
If you want to solve this problem,
Yes.
you have to, the way you solve this problem, if that's
Yes.
really what you want to do, is you ask yourself, where am I matching the destructive energy? What is it in me that's compliant?
Oh, you're sending me to therapy, Richard.
No, what in me is compliant with it? Like John Friedlander says in one of his more eloquent things that I quoted myself in the book, because I've been transcribing his classes for making a book of them, is he says, do you think that the Dalai Lama doesn't want world peace or want to protect the Tibetan people? He prays deeply for world peace, but he can't do anything about that. And he is in the same world as the terrorists. So at some level, he is matching their energy too, because if he weren't matching their energy, he would disappear from this probability, as will anybody who's not matching the energy here. So we're all contributing to it. And the most powerful thing you can do, I think, is to try and fix the little piece where you're contributing to it. What am I doing that is adding to the polarization? What could I do that might, in some way, just very tiny way, but absolutely indisputable way, improve things?
Yeah, my podcast with Jody Evans, that's just what she says. Jody is the most powerful human being. Mm-hmm. As I said in my podcast, I think she could be the president. If she were on that stage, she would run rings around all of them. Guess what? She doesn't want power. She thinks power corrupts, and she's not after it. And when I, have this conversation with her about what could we come up with? What's the big plan? No, just do the little things in front of you. But really, in terms of doing the little things, she's done huge things. She's front page in the New York Times today, getting arrested.
Well, some people are really good at doing the little things in a really big way, and other people don't. You don't know, because it's the old butterfly's wings. You don't know what they're doing. At our house in Portland in Maine, we had difficulty with the neighbor across the street who watches Fox News all day and reported us to the city for doing Airbnb, because we did it a bit. And ultimately, to make a long story short, I went over, and even with the television on blasting Fox News, I had conversations with him that really kind of shifted the ground, and he enjoyed them, and I enjoyed them, and I thought that they were moving, even though I don't think he changed a single position. I remember one time I went over there and he was complaining about the Me Too movement and how he's a retired police detective, and he was complaining about how anybody could accuse anybody of anything, and what do you think about that, and this and that. And I forget exactly what I said, but it was something about how much more complicated this was. And I remember, I wish I could remember how we got to this. He smiled and said, yeah, and it all begins with Airbnb. And that showed he had a sense of humor.
Really? Well, I think this is a very viable thing. Do what's right in front of you. Do, just little steps, and who knows, just do them. They may go somewhere, they may not, but that's a viable way to proceed in life.
And do what you're doing.
So Richard,
just don't be so insistent that these questions have answers, because they don't.
Well, I'm bringing them up and I'm stating my side, and then I'm obviously speaking to people who, are not on my side, so to speak. And this is good. This is what, listen to this podcast and you'll get a lot of sides, I think to myself, what would be okay for life, for my life? Like, what would be the bottom line of acceptability? And I think I would really like to be content. Being content would be a very desirable state to be in. So I want to ask you that. Are you content?
No.
No. And do you think that that's something to aspire to look for?
I think one does naturally. I don't think that you can judge the outcome by whether you achieve that or not, because you achieve different degrees of content at different
Yeah.
times.
I don't mean that I'm content that the world is good, just content that I'm
No, I
doing my
know.
best,
Yeah.
that I've stepped up to the plate, that I'm contributing as well as I could be contributing. That sense of, oh, okay. I would very much like to be able to report that that's my state of mind. Does that ring any bells?
Well, you're working toward it. We all are operating from our own reality. That's the kind of wonder of this, that even though apparently we're all interdependent and connected, and there is only, in a sense, one consciousness, we are embedded in such a way that we have a personal reality. To be enacting that personal reality, it's not only valuable, it's what you're impelled to do. It's the very nature of it.
Where are you on the contentment scale? Or doesn't it matter? Is that not the one that
I don't
you're...
think it matters because it's a process and you don't really know the outcome. That's something I trouble over a great deal now. I mean, you know that because I've talked about this being a really difficult time for me personally. And yesterday, well, the day before yesterday, John Friedlander said to me, and I take it that he's reading me psychically from a great distance. He said, you have a change in the ground of being, which is something that only happens every 3 or 4 incarnations. And it's really profound. I find it very disquieting and uncomfortable because all the ideas I have really don't seem very significant from moment to moment in relation to the fact that I can't really track the world in the way that I was tracking it, and the compass points are all gone. That's really uncomfortable. I had mastered for most of my life looking at the grungiest and darkest parts of reality and finding a positive way to look at them. And now that's flipped around, and I see everything as so kind of thin and shallow. And I see the capitalist overlay on everything so strongly. It's not just in capitalist countries. The kind of loss or lack of actual community and actual connection, and the fundamental loneliness that is imposed by the civilization and the culture that then has been so heightened by the internet, which is isolating people in kind of customized realities, customized virtual realities that they create. I don't know the way out of it. I mean, we lived in Berkeley for 38 years, and then we moved to Maine part time about I guess 23 years into those 38 years, and then full time after 38 years. And I don't find either Maine or Berkeley tolerable to live in, which leaves me no place to live that I feel comfortable. I'm shocked is not the right word because I'm not really shocked, but I'm sort of overwhelmed by how sort of spiritually empty and dark so much of the same Berkeley landscape seems as compared to the landscape we came to in 1975 when we visited it the first time with young kids and decided gradually to be there. But it's really not a political thing, but nonetheless I'll say it this way. You see the map of the United States, I think it's who counties voted for. And the map is black for the counties that voted for Trump, and it's white for counties that voted for Hillary Clinton, except for a few little spots of white around New York and LA and some other places, and some dots elsewhere. It's all black, the whole country. That's sort of in some ways a meaningless measure. Not meaningless, but it's not the measure I'm thinking of. The measure I'm thinking of is that anywhere you go, pretty much, you see the failure of the civilization in terms of building something that makes people safe and connects people. I mean, when you have the level of people living on the street, and in truth, nobody cares. I mean, they would rather they live on the street than have to deal with it. But even beyond that, when you drive along roads and see the crappy stores that are thrown up for no other purpose than to run merchandise through, and then the industries that are set up to employ people to keep producing this merchandise, and then you see that the rules are all going out. So like the pharmacy industry can just churn out, as far as they're concerned, like the opioid crisis. Let's addict people to these things, then they'll buy more, then we'll have more money. Well, I just suddenly am having the experience of seeing and feeling this everywhere. And it's not just being politically discouraged, it's just finding it very uninhabitable.
Well, can't argue with any of that for sure.
I would
What a
like to
time.
argue with it. I'd like to find the pathway
Yeah.
out of it. And I'm finally with Elias. It's impossible. That's the only reason it's possible, is that it's so impossible it has to be possible.
Yeah. Well, that may be, something we will reflect on later and say, oh my God, it got so bad that finally, again, we're back to my thing again.
I wouldn't even say
turn around.
it got so bad. I would say that it is so incomprehensible, finally. It's not even that it's bad. It's that it's absurd and it's incomprehensible and it's cruel and it's self-sabotaging. It's fundamentally self-sabotaging for the people involved in it. Going back to your billionaires who won't participate, that's just one form of self-sabotage, because at the other end of the scale, you have the poor people in West Virginia who have gotten addicted to painkillers. It's all self-sabotage.
What a time, huh?
And so you feel that, like, you think of the Zen monk who says things are bad, so it's a good time to practice. If only we knew exactly what to practice and how to practice it.
You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that all of this is really good fodder for conversation, and I hope that we can generate some of that seriously, that people will comment on this and kick in with their thoughts and, with agreements, disagreements, or new ideas, that would be that would satisfy me. That would make me very content if I could be at the hub of a really meaningful, ongoing conversation among high-minded, smart people.
Well, you've earned it. You've certainly done all the work. You've put in the time and you've been undeterrable, and you've had many obstacles thrown in your way.
Well, Richard, tell me now, as we kind of draw this to a close, what would you say is, like, what are you doing here? What's the point of your being here? What's your mission?
Well, that changes. I'll just say that in my present state, I've been more inclined to consult psychics and some shamanic, and participate in a couple of shamanic rituals. Although my Penobscot Native American friend who we published, Sherry Mitchell, joked that she calls them Sunday shamans, Westerners who learn how to do it. A lot of people have told me, people who are unconnected to each other, that these suicides in my family and this shadow goes very far back, and that I'm kind of here in some way to change the terms of that. Elias said, again, whatever your belief system is, and I don't have a confirmed one about past lives or whatever, but he said, every other time you've come, you've left this one thing undone. And he said, right now, you're determined to get it done, to somehow do it. But of course, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the things that I want to do or the things that I don't want to do, because it just as easily be either. It could be the things I don't want to do, because that's why I never get it done. Or it could be the things I do want to do, and like this is once in a 10,000 year opportunity. But I do think that we're working with forces, with ancestral forces that are beyond our knowledge, beyond our comprehension. And, talk about crazy. I mean, isn't it strange that my mother, brother, and sister all committed suicide? And I don't have any different internal mapping than they do. I I know that they were dealing with the same kinds of shadow energies that I've worked with. I think they didn't see them, and it's sometimes hard to see them, as opportunities to transform something. If I thought that you could, and again, discuss this with Larry because he talks about this, if you could just say, okay, I've had enough, I'm going to leave. But I don't think it works that way. I think that whatever problems you're dealing with, you're going to still be dealing with no matter where you are in terms of the being that you are. And I said to John 2 days ago when I spoke to him that I felt so troubled that there was a way in which his proposition of the transition of the soul through eternity was much more attractive than this world. And that I had to remind myself that this is that. This isn't any different than that. This is the soul passing through the forms it has to engage. And to quote the Taoist line that John likes to quote, what's in the way is the way. I think that that's the issue for each of us, as frankly unpleasant as that is, that at any given moment, what's in the way is what we have to confront. Not it's in the way, so we have to find the way around it, but it's in the way because it's the next thing that we have to deal with.
I'm thinking about Papaji. One of my podcasts was with Ramana. He was sent out to be a teacher by Papaji in the Ramana Maharshi lineage, the Advaita lineage. The quote there is, "What stands in the way of finding?" And the answer is seeking. Mm. So kind of, the same. Here we are.
There are so many
this
levels.
Is it. And then what?
Look to the depth rather than the surface of the world.
Oh, I like that. That's right. Good. Oh, okay. Richard, we could do this forever. We have been doing it forever. Yeah. We'll go on to do it some more forever.
Okay.
So, okay, a pleasure to have you in my family.
Yeah, our extended family.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and your smarts. Really appreciate it.
Now Suzanne takes your hand and she leads you to the river.
So, dear listeners, thank you for tuning into my podcast. Do subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And visit SueSpeaksPodcast.com for notes on what we covered in this episode and for additional information about my guests. Also, please leave comments. I'd love to hear your opinions and engage with you. How did you feel about what you heard? Did you learn anything? Or were you inspired to act in any new way? Or do you have something to add that would let us know what you know? Grab a cup of consciousness and fire away.
And you want to travel with her, and you want to travel blind, and you can trust her, for she's touched your perfect body with her mind.